In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create a landscape in our scene. Alright, so let's go ahead and build up the outside. Now we're going to keep this a little simple. Okay, we're not going to get too terribly carried away with landscapes, but just to kind of show off how this works. So the first thing that we'll need to do is go into our modes panel and we'll go to the landscape category. Now the first thing that you'll want to do is manage your landscape. So you'll notice that sculpt and paint are not available until we've actually clicked on create. Now before we create anything, I want to go ahead and set up my location. I don't want my landscape to end up right here at the floor of my object here. So what I want to do is I actually want to drop this down. Instead of being 100, I'm going to drop that down to, let's say, -400. And what that'll do is it'll make this room appear as if it's like on a second story or something like that. Okay, you could probably go a little bit lower if you like, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it just the way it is. So I'm going to leave everything else as default because this has to deal with resolution of your landscape, and usually the default is pretty good. Alright, so with that set, let's go ahead and create, and you'll notice that we get this plane that we can start painting on. Now you'll notice that we have our sculpt tools and our paint tools. We're just going to be sculpting on this just for right now. So with the sculpt activated, you'll see that we have the landscape editor roll out, and we have sculpt, circle brush, and smooth fall off. So this is what tool we're actually using. If you left click on that, you'll see that you get an entire menu, and it actually goes off screen. I apologize about that. But we have things like sculpt, smooth, flatten. We can create a ramp, erosion, hydro erosion, noise, and so on. We're just going to be using sculpt right now. Now we'll choose the brush that we want to use, and this is actually the kind of brush. So we want to use a circle, do we want to use an alpha, a pattern, or a component? In this case, we're just going to use the circle brush, and whenever we left click out here, you'll notice that that is what we get. Now you'll also have your fall off, and in this case it's going to be a smooth fall off. We could do linear where it creates very hard edges. We could also do spherical, which will give us a very smooth center, but very sharp at the edges. And then we have tip, which will allow us to create very smooth edges. Okay, so let's go ahead and just use smooth fall off on this one, and let's go ahead and start sculpting. So you can adjust things like your brush size, your fall off, and you have this option called use clay brush. I tend to use this quite a bit because what it does is it fills in holes as we go along, and you'll find that as you build it up, it becomes very smooth very quickly. Now our tool strength right now, we could set that to a default value of 0.3, but normally I like to be around 0.1 just to kind of control that. So to get started, let's go ahead and start building some hills that go around the visible area of our environment here. So we're just going to simply hold down Control, and then we're going to left click, and you'll notice that if you release and you click again, it builds on top of. But if you hold it down and start to build, you'll notice that it stays around the same height and doesn't build very much. So normally what I do is I do a lot of clicking at first, and then I'll go through and start refining how that looks. So I'll come in, and remember, hold down Control, and we'll start to build that up. Now if you want to push it down, you'll simply hold down Control and then Shift, and that will push it down into your area. Now at any time, if you want, you can hit Control Z to undo your changes. In this case, I want to go ahead and do that. So let's hold down Control, let's start building up these areas, and I just want to create some hills so that way we're not looking at the flat edge all the way out to the end. Okay. And so we'll have to do a little bit of checking as we go through this. But you can see it's very easy to create these landscapes. Okay. And we'll come in, we'll smooth some of this out. But I want to make sure that I build it around my environment so that way we can't see any of those areas that go out to the edge from our environment, from the player's point of view. So if we come in here, we take a look, we can see that we have some hills here. Looking pretty good. If I go out to this side, I really can't see out that end. Come over here, that looks pretty good. Now there is one little area right there that I can see out to the edge, so we'll want to go ahead and we'll take care of that. Okay. So this is just for visual I've lost the word here. It's just to help with the visuals as we're looking outside of the level. And so now I've built those hills up, And now what I want to do is I want to start to smooth those out a little bit. So let's switch from the Sculpt tool to the Smooth tool. And it works exactly the same. Hold down Control, and that will start to smooth out some of those areas. Now if you get a little bit carried away, you can actually flatten some of that out. You probably don't want to do that, so just be careful. What I do is I tend to just kind of bump the edges, coming around, just trying to get rid of some of those very sharp edges and some of those peaks that got a little too high there. Start to kind of flatten out some of the hills a little bit, make them a little more realistic as far as being traversable. We don't want mountains or anything like that, just some hills. And the backside really doesn't matter all that much. We don't really have to smooth it out because we're never going to be able to see that anyway. We're not creating a level that we can go outside like in an open world. We're just creating kind of a secondary element as if we're looking out the window. We don't want to see just a flat plane. We want to see natural landscapes. Okay, so just kind of bumping these edges, looking pretty good. Happy with the way that's looking so far. And then what we'll do is we'll actually break up the horizon even more by adding in some foliage. Okay, and I brought those into the project files, so you should have those in the project files. Okay. Alright, great. So now we have our landscape. We've got this neat little hill country that kind of breaks up that edge, and we'll be able to look out the window and we won't see any weird seams that go all the way out. So looking good. Alright, now what I want to do is I want to apply a material to our landscape, and this is done pretty easy. We're not going to be talking about painting landscapes because that can get very complicated, and I don't want to overload you if this is the very first time that you've touched Unreal. So to go ahead and apply a material, we'll simply go to our details, and you'll see that we have this landscape material. So it's just like adding any other material. We'll simply go to our content browser, go to your materials folder, and select this ground grass. Or you could even choose this ground moss, but I think that might look a little weird. But we have ground grass. We'll go back into our editor and we'll just simply assign that. And there we go. Now we've got grass on our scene. Alright, very, very good. So now with that said, let's talk about adding foliage, and that's going to take us to our next panel. And we'll start talking about how to do that next.